All right, so here we are on the third day of working on the mug. The first day I made it, put it all together. The second day I really kind of smoothed the top out. I made the bottom so that it was how I wanted it to be, adjusted the handle, made a few changes to it, and then I let it sit and get leather hard. I have put it under the blow dryer so it's still a little more firm yet. And what I'm going to do now is my designs. So in my hot chocolate textured mug page, there was a design page on the back, so I worked out some design ideas there. And then I wasn't quite sure I wanted one of those, so I worked on a few more ideas on another piece of paper, and I think that I've decided I want to do this design, which is going to be creating kind of this checkerboard pattern that wraps around it. And then I'm going to do my first name, which is David, in the boxes on around it going this way here. All right, so I'm going to set that design template there. I'm going to move my mug up here out of the way for a moment. And I can go ahead now and begin carving on my mug, but what I would like to do is get my lines fairly straight. So what I'm going to do is, my template still fits up there. It's about 5 inches. It's, with a base, it's a little bit less. Now my clay will shrink and it won't be that tall when it's done, but for right now I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to make a mark every inch. I could do every ½ inch if I wanted smaller spaces, but 5 spaces for me sounds about right. And then I'm going to take my ruler and draw lines going across. If I find I don't like this, I can always get another piece of paper, make a new template, and work it out on that, or I can just change my ideas and designs as we go. All right, so I decided I wanted to do squares going across, so that would mean they need to be 1 inch across. Now the way this template works with the handle, it won't completely be exact, but it'll hopefully get me pretty close to where I want it to be. Okay, so that's there. I'm going to go ahead and draw my lines going the other way. And what's going to happen is I'm going to wrap this around there, and then I'll use a needle tool or some other tool to make marks in the clay so I know where my lines go. Now these squares are pretty exact. On my mug, they won't be so exact. It's part of that concept that it's clay, it doesn't, perfection isn't what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a good use of design. And perfection may work for a good use of design, but to me, that's not what I'm looking for on this mug. All right, so I'm going to move this back up here, and I'm going to put my template around it like this, and on the back, I want it so that it matches up pretty close like that. That's a pretty good fit for me. All right, so my needle tool is here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that, and I don't want to put design on the top of my mug. Let me take this, set that down for a second, because that's where my lip goes, and so I usually stop my designs before they get to the top of the mug. Here's a couple of examples you can see. So what I'm going to do, make sure that's still right, looks pretty good, is I'm going to take the needle tool and I'm going to poke little marks. Of course, I don't want to poke all the way through the clay, just into the clay. Figure that out. Okay, so that makes it pretty easy. I can see the checkerboard with my marks on there. They're just every spot. So I'm going to take a tool and I'm going to carve into it. Now you should practice this on clay, a piece of practice clay before you start. Now this is a very narrow end for a ribbon tool. This one is slightly wider than that. And then if you look, this one is wider still. Actually, this one would be like the next step. This one's wider still. This one is wider still. This is a flat end. This is a different ribbon tool. Usually it's used for trimming on the wheel, but you can carve into clay with it. And of course, the Sgraffito tool has a narrow wire and a thicker wire. Lots of things can carve into them. The needle tool will carve into them. The problem is it gives you a skinny line, and you want your lines to be more than just skinny lines. You want them to be nice and carved in. So I'm going to use this medium end there. And so I'm going to take the tool and I'm going to carve into the clay like so. And that didn't come out exactly even there, but I think it'll be fine. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to carve around the top. So with carving, the question is, how do I do this so it's a straight line? My lines really aren't perfectly straight, but it'll work for the pattern. One of the things you can do to stabilize is, you notice I rest my hand on the edge of the mug. My hand is resting on the table there. A lot of times when I'm working, I find a stable point. This is kind of difficult. I'm trying to do it so you can see it on the screen, but yet at the same time keep it straight. So you have to find little tricks that work, and that's one of them. So I've got my pattern going around there. Next is to figure out my initials. So looking at this, I think what I'm going to do is put David right through these, and then I'll just do designs in the other. So V would be pretty close to the middle, which is here. So I'm going to write a V in there. All right, so I'm going to try using the narrower tool to make these. There we go. All right, so I've got David carved in there. We'll smooth all this out once it gets more dry, probably bone dry. All right, so then I can do designs in the other boxes. So these were my original design ideas, lines going opposite directions, but you notice I have circles, I have some different shapes, different things that might work. So I'm going to think about this for a minute, and once I've had a chance to process all of that, once I've decided what I'm going to do, I'll show you guys the next step. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a kind of a checkerboard pattern where there's lines going down and across, down and across. So I'm going to start on this side. It'll be a little bit easier for me to work on, and I'll show you what I mean. So I think that I can do 3 lines with this wider tool. So I'm going to do one in the middle and one on each side. And then I'm going to skip and then do the same thing here, start in the middle. So these things become real sharp and, well, very sharp actually once they're fired and glazed. So once the mug gets bone dry, I'm going to smooth all these out. I'm going to leave them for the time being because I'll mess them up if I try and get rid of them right now. All right, so I've done all of those directions. Now I'm going to go the other direction. That's where I go up with it. Okay, so that looks good all the way around. I like it. I wish I had planned this slightly better here so that came out. What I think is I'm going to just, next time I do another one, I'm going to plan that better on that side there. Now, I'm not going to do anything on the top. I think I'm going to put some little designs on the bottom. Maybe I'll run those designs along the bottom, and then up the side would be interesting on that. So let me find a stamp for that, and I'll show you what I'm going to do there. Okay, so I think I figured out what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some buttons that go along the bottom and along this little piece here. So here's an example of one of the buttons that I made. And they're going to go around the bottom like that. And they're all 0.02 to 0.03 or 4 pounds each. And I'm going to line them up along the bottom. I have a stamp here that I made, and I'm going to use this stamp. So I've got 4 balls of clay here that I rolled out. These are all pre-made, but I roll the ball of clay out like that. Set those on the table. And then the stamp just pushes down and comes out. All right, so those are ready to go. This is my practice one. And you can see where I was practicing some different stamps that I had to see what I liked. So to attach those, you guys know how to do that. Score, slip, and weld them on. So I'm going to start right here. And I'm going to score. All right, I need to score the back of these. 8, 9, and then 4 up the side. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 3 extras that I might want to use, or I might want to just recycle them. All right, so to make this easier, I'm going to add slip to them. I'm going to start right here. And I do want my pattern, I think, to line up so that it's up and down with these. Those don't affect my holding on to the handle, which is good. I like it. Okay, so there is my almost finished mug. What's left, I'm going to let this, actually before I let it get leather hard, I'm going to put my name on the bottom, even though it's on the side of it. I like to sign things with my last name, and since it's pretty long, I usually curve it around the bottom of a piece. So I'm going to start it right here. So G. So I like to let this dry just like the sides before I touch it up. So I'm going to put this probably like this in my locker, upside down. I want it to dry now. I want it to dry slowly. And the way to get it to dry slowly is not to put it on the shelf because it'll dry very quickly out there. As it dries slowly, it's less likely to warp. And then once it's bone dry, I've got to be very careful. I don't want to mess with it and break something off, but I can take a brush and I can clean off a lot of this stuff. I can also take some tools and clean it out. So I'll show you that step once it's bone dry. All right, so here we are with our mug. It is 90% bone dry, not completely, but it's definitely at a point where I can work on it some more. So remember, when it's bone dry, it is at its most fragile state. You will break the handle off if you're not careful, and then you have to start your mug over because your mug needs to have a handle and there's no way to reattach it once it's bone dry. So please be very cautious and careful about that. So one of the things you can use is a brush to get rid of those chunks of clay that are in the grooves. You can clean areas up with that. Something else you can do is sandpaper. So if things are sharp, you can use a piece of sandpaper to lightly sand it, and that will get rid of some of these sharp edges on there. Usually after that, I'll brush it again to get rid of the extra dust off the piece. If you sand, please do that outside so that you're not getting a lot of sand or that dust in the classroom. But one of my favorite tools for kind of getting rid of some of this rough stuff is a piece of cloth or a canvas. So here's a canvas, just one of the ones that we use. And you could take this kind of like sandpaper. Let me set that down. It's a big piece here. So what you would do is use this to kind of polish that clay. Now you'll break the buttons off in the handle, like I said, if you're not careful. A lot of times when I make a piece, I will use this on the bottom of it afterwards to smooth out where I put my name on there. And just kind of polish that and get rid of all those rough spots on there. You can also take the brush and clean out the letters. You can also take sandpaper and sand it. So I would actually probably use the canvas on the bottom, and then I would brush it, and then I would use this black sandpaper. Is very fine. It'll give you a nice, smooth finish to that. Actually, I'll show you one more thing you can use on that. So anything that is a hard surface will give you a nice polished edge. Okay, so this is actually a piece of glass that I could use to burnish, which in essence is polishing that bottom. I prefer to do this when it's not bone dry, but it still works fine at that point. And I would brush this stuff into the garbage can, and that'll give you a lot smoother finish on the bottom. And so you would just work around the piece, take your time. Definitely don't rush through this step. You can also take one of the tools, like this fine tip one that you used originally. If there's little chunks in there, you can sometimes get those loose with that. Polish up any spots that need polishing. But once again, you just have to be so cautious of not messing something up, because you can definitely break something if you're not careful. If you're careful, it's fine. You can still mess it up if you're careful, but there's less of a chance. So all these things, once it's fired, it makes a difference to have them cleaned up. Okay, that actually worked pretty good on there, but I definitely would go back through, and I'm going to really smooth all of this and polish it. At this point, you know what you need to do. Okay, and then that would be my mug that I would turn in to be fired.